Welcome to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. This is what's been going on in China in the past 24 hours. Chinese Vice Premier Zhang Guoqing joined French President Emmanuel Macron's Global Convergence for Growth video call on global economic imbalances. That matters because France is hosting the G7 summit in Evian-les-Bains from June 15th to 17th, and China is expected to be one of the main topics. Beijing normally treats the G7 like an exclusive club it did not join and does not respect. So Zhang showing up is a signal. Macron is trying to see whether China will cooperate before Europe reaches for tougher trade tools. The European concern is not subtle. China's export machine has moved way beyond cheap goods. The worry now is electric vehicles, lithium-ion batteries, and high-tech products flooding into markets where European manufacturers are already fighting for oxygen. Some analysts are calling it a second China shock. Germany is still cautious because China is a huge export market, but Chinese automakers are no longer distant competition. They are showing up in the same lane as German car makers, and that changes the mood music in Berlin. Beijing, for its part, rejects claims that its companies benefit unfairly from state subsidies and says unilateral tariffs are the real trade problem. Classic Beijing: show up to the table, reject the premise, and remind everyone the house rules are unfair. Now let's move from trade diplomacy to one of the most important technology choke points on the board: indium phosphide. This is the kind of material that sounds like it belongs in a Marvel movie, but it is very real, very strategic, and very important for AI data centers. China has been throttling export licenses for indium phosphide since February 2025. The material is essential for photonics, which lets high-speed optical chips move data with light instead of copper wire. That is a huge deal as AI workloads explode and data centers need faster, more energy-efficient ways to move information. U.S. companies are feeling it. Coherent CEO Jim Anderson reportedly raised the issue while traveling with a U.S. business delegation during President Trump's trip to China, and the issue also came up in Seoul ahead of Trump's May 14th and 15th summit with Xi Jinping. AXT and Sumitomo dominate the global substrate market, and AXT makes most of its indium phosphide substrates in China. Since the restrictions began, the average price for a 6-inch wafer has jumped 250% to about $5,000. Lumentum is reportedly sold out through 2028, despite quadrupling output. That is not a supply chain hiccup. That is the world's AI build-out, getting stuck behind a very specific material gate, and Beijing knows exactly where the gate is. There is a domestic industrial angle, too. Chinese firms, including Yunnan Germanium, Guangdong Xiandao, and Zhuhai Dingtai Xinyuan, are scaling production. Yunnan Germanium announced a roughly $28 million expansion to reach 450,000 single indium phosphide wafers annually. Guangdong Xiandao is moving on a project with expected annual output of 40 tons of indium phosphide crystals. In plain English, China is squeezing exports while building domestic capacity. That is not accidental. That is supply chain statecraft with a clipboard and a stopwatch. On the intelligence front, U.S. authorities moved against another alleged Chinese collection network, and this one has the old-school espionage smell with a modern LinkedIn-era paint job. The Justice Department and FBI seized 13 domains tied to fake consulting firms that allegedly targeted current and former U.S. government and military personnel, including clearance holders. The pitch was familiar: vague consulting work, analyst roles, easy money, and a request for exclusive or insider information. The alleged scheme dates back to November 2023 and used stolen identities, aliases, AI-generated photos, Telegram and other encrypted apps, overseas payments, cryptocurrency, and fake contracts to look legitimate. The fake jobs included titles like Senior Analyst and International Affairs Consultant. Recruiters used platforms including Upwork, Expertia AI, Hubstaff Talent, Wellfound, and Postjob Free. That is the danger zone. It does not look like a trench coat in a parking garage. It looks like a remote consulting gig with a clean website and a weirdly generous payment offer. The Kevin Mallory case remains the cautionary tale in the background, but the fresh point is that these approaches are still active, still adaptive, and still aimed at people who know things Beijing wants. The information fight is also moving into AI tools. OpenAI said it banned likely China-linked accounts that use ChatGPT to generate content targeting U.S. debates over tariffs, data centers, and AI infrastructure. One cluster, described as the Data Center Bandwagon Campaign, tried to amplify concerns about electricity prices and local impacts from data center construction. Another, the Tech and Tariffs Campaign, generated short comments and cartoons criticizing Trump's trade and tech policies. Some content was posted on X. Some was in Chinese language comment sections. Some was generated in Italian and Japanese. OpenAI said the activity had little to no meaningful breakout, which is important. This was not exactly a blockbuster opening weekend, but the signal is still worth watching. The operators were testing narratives around a real U.S. debate: energy, local opposition, and the massive infrastructure required to keep America's AI lead. Chinese officials and state-linked commentary rejected the claims, arguing U.S. data center opposition comes from real domestic problems like power supply, grid capacity, and community backlash. That point is worth separating from the operation itself. Foreign influence works best when it rides a real issue. It does not need to invent the fire if it can just blow on the smoke. Around Taiwan, today's update is less about one dramatic move and more about Beijing trying to make pressure feel normal. Chinese state media said ships conducted a special maritime traffic law enforcement operation east of Taiwan, inspecting 198 vessels, claiming to correct violations involving 3 ships, conducting a hydrographic survey, and patrolling areas where undersea cables are located. Taiwan's Coast Guard said China has no jurisdiction there and vowed to expel any vessel asserting it. That undersea cable detail matters. This is not just about flags and maps. It is about the infrastructure that keeps Taiwan connected. Taiwan also reported 2 Chinese government ships entering restricted waters near Itu-Aba in the South China Sea for about 15 minutes, getting as close as 2.1 nautical miles before leaving after warnings. Separately, Taiwan tracked 11 Chinese military aircraft, 6 naval vessels, and 3 official ships around the island from Wednesday morning to Thursday morning, with 9 aircraft crossing the Taiwan Strait median line. That is the daily grind of gray zone pressure. Enough activity to stretch defenders, not enough to trigger a war. Taiwan added a harder-edged signal with its first live-fire HIMARS drill from the western coast facing China. The Army fired 32 test rockets from near a potential landing area. The training rockets were limited range, but the larger point is political and strategic. Taiwan wants Beijing and Washington to see that it is building a more credible asymmetric defense. The timing also lands while a larger U.S. arms package remains unresolved, and Taiwan opposition leader Cheng Li-wen is in Washington after meeting Xi in April. So the drill is not just about rockets. It is about Taiwan's internal politics, U.S. support, and Beijing's invasion calculus, all colliding in one frame. In the South China Sea, the Philippines is watching Scarborough Shoal closely after identifying 6 new foreign objects since May 30th. The list includes suspected antennas, a floating structure, a cylindrical object, and buoys, plus a roughly 20 by 20-foot makeshift structure reportedly carrying 6 occupants. Philippine military chief Romeo Brawner Jr. said Manila flew aircraft over the shoal and would also send ships. China has not denied the objects are Chinese, instead restating its sovereignty claim and describing activity there as within its rights. That is Beijing's favorite maritime magic trick. Create facts on the water, then talk like the dispute was settled centuries ago. Vietnam, meanwhile, is buying deterrence with a very clear purpose. Hanoi is set to become the second foreign buyer of India's BrahMos supersonic cruise missile after the Philippines. Indian Defense Secretary Rajesh Kumar Singh acknowledged the deal on May 30th at the Shangri-La Dialogue and said a similar agreement with Indonesia is nearing completion. The export version has a range of roughly 180 miles and flies at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. Vietnam is expected to acquire a shore-based system, which strengthens its ability to hold hostile naval vessels at risk near its coastline. This fits Hanoi's playbook. Keep economic ties with Beijing, but quietly build options with India, the US, Japan, and Australia. Finally, Washington is also targeting China and Hong Kong-based networks tied to Iran. Treasury sanctioned 11 people and entities for supporting weapons procurement by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Iranian military. 9 were China and Hong Kong-based individuals and companies, and one Hong Kong-based firm was accused of operating inside Iran's clandestine banking network. That is the connective tissue in today's brief. Trade leverage, tech choke points, intelligence collection, maritime pressure, influence operations, and sanctions evasion all moving at once. China is playing across the whole board. The US and its partners are now trying to keep every square covered. Thanks for listening. If this episode was useful, take a second to leave a review or drop a comment. It makes a real difference in getting this in front of the right audience. We also publish a daily intel brief on Substack at restrictedhandling.substack.com with deeper coverage on Russia, China, Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK. Have a great rest of your day.